Welcome, fear listeners, to Phantom Fables, your haven for haunting tales and eerie wonders. Tonight, we enter the unknown, beyond the iron gates of an abandoned estate that whispers secrets of the past. Beware, this is not a story, it's a descent into darkness. Beyond the gate lies a world where shadows come to life, and the cries of the forgotten echo through the night. Those who dare to uncover its mysteries must prepare to face their deepest fears. This is the chilling tale of Beyond the Gate. In the autumn of 1684, the village of Świerkówka, deep within the dense forests of Poland, seemed shrouded in a strange silence. The villagers were mostly simple farmers and craftsmen, living in harmony with the land. But at the center of this peaceful settlement stood an anomaly, a gigantic iron gate, rusted with time and covered with creeping vines. The gate stood on its own, as if risen from the earth by some ancient forgotten force. There were no walls or fences. Legends surrounded the gate. Old grandmothers whispered it to their big-eyed children gathered around the hearths. They said it was accursed, a passage to a land of torment, closed shut by their ancestors many years ago. The elders were stern in their warnings. Never go near it, never touch it, for the shadows it casts are unholy too. Most of the people stayed away, but curiosity had a way with the younger hearts. For brothers Jehoahaz and Jehoiachin, the gate was more than just a relic of superstition. It was a puzzle, one their father, Baruch, had been determined to solve. Baruch was a historian, a man of letters in a village of simpletons. He spent countless nights poring over ancient scrolls and deciphering cryptic texts about the gate's origins. But 3 weeks ago, Baruch had vanished, last seen walking into the forest with a leather-bound journal clutched tightly in his hands. The disappearance of Baruch cast a pall over the village. Some whispered that he had offended the spirits guarding the gate. Others believed he had ventured too close and been taken by the cursed forces within. His sons, Jehoahaz and Jehoiachin, refused to accept these tales. Jehoahaz, the elder at 23, was pragmatic and fiercely protective of his younger brother. Jehoiachin, only 18, possessed a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity that mirrored their father's. The brothers shared their grief but approached it differently. Jehoahaz sought closure while Jehoiachin sought answers. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, the brothers gathered their closest friends at their home. Yedid, a carpenter with a quiet strength. Aviva, a spirited herbalist with knowledge of ancient remedies. Riva, a gentle soul who could calm even the wildest tempers. And Adina, whose quick wit often masked her unspoken fears. Jehoahaz addressed them with grave determination. "We can't wait any longer. Father is out there somewhere. If no one else will seek him out, we must—" "The gate," Jehoiachin added, his voice with a tinge of excitement and fear. "That's where he was headed. It's the key to everything." Riva shivered, holding her shawl tighter. "But the gate, it's cursed. What if the legends are true?" "Legends or not," Jehoahaz said firmly, "we owe it to him to find the truth." Under the cover of darkness, the group made their way to Baruch's study. The room was a chaotic maze of books, scrolls, and maps. Jehoiachin began rummaging through the piles, his fingers tracing faded ink and brittle parchment. "Here," he shouted, pulling out their father's journal. Its pages were filled with careful notes and sketches of the gate, interspersed with translations of old Hebrew texts. One entry stuck out. The gate predates the village itself. It was built during the era of King Solomon, a seal against powers too threatening to understand. Yet the seal is weakening. It can be sensed in howsoever small indications, dreams and whispers of wind, and in the fade out of light. Aviva looked closer at me, frowning. "Dreams, what does it mean?" "I've been dreaming about the gate. Jehoiachin admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Ever since Father disappeared, it's like it's calling to me. The group exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had spoken of it aloud, but each had felt an inexplicable pull toward the gate in recent days. They moved off for the gate the following morning. The woods were alive with rustling of leaves and with the calls of unseen things. But when they came close to the clearing where the gate stood, all was still unnatural. The gate loomed ahead, larger and more menacing than any of them had remembered. Its iron surface seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, Hebrew letters interwoven with designs none of them recognized. Jehoahaz stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching out. Jehoiachin grabbed his wrist. Don't. Not yet. But Jehoiachin fell to his knees to study the ground beside the gate. There, in the dirt, he found footprints. Baruch's boots were easy to identify. The prince went directly to the gate but did not return. He went through, Jehoiachin said, his voice quivering. But how? Yedid asked. The gate hasn't opened in centuries. Jehoiachin pointed to the symbols. These are part of an incantation. Father must have worked out how to open it. As the discussion continued, a cold wind swept through the clearing. The whispers it brought were faint and like voices from afar. It was not understandable, but there was a melancholy tone that seemed almost begging. Aviva clutched her amulet, mumbling a prayer. This place, it's not natural. We shouldn't be here. Jehoiachin didn't seem to mind. If Father could do it, so can we. He flipped through the journal, landing on a page that listed the ritual. The instructions were sketchy, but Jehoiachin's sharp mind began to fill in the gaps. We require 7 stones from the river and a drop of blood from us all, he explained. Blood? Riva gasped. It is part of the seal, trust me, Jehoiachin insisted. Reluctantly, they trailed behind him. The ritual began, and with the last drop of blood falling on the gate, it quivered. Iron groaned with ancient gears coming to life inside. The gate creaked open slowly, and a swirling vortex of darkness came into view. Air grew colder, and whispers louder until they became distinct words. Why do you seek the forbidden? Jehoiachin moved forward, his voice steady. We want Baruch. He is our father. The emptiness pulsed, and for a fleeting instant, they caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure inside. It was Baruch, his face white and eyes wide with fear. Get out, he screamed. It's not what you think. The gate is... Before he could finish the sentence, the emptiness sucked him in and the gate started to close. No, Jehoiachin shouted, pushing forward, but Jehoahaz held him back. What now? Yedid asked, his voice quivering. Jehoiachin looked toward the group with eyes full of resolve. We go in. That is the only way to save him. As Jehoiachin turned, he stepped across into the silent unknown. The group was left to stand at the closed gate and listen in hushed tones of the still forest. The first step had been made, but little did they know what awaited them on the other side. The night after the gate closed passed restlessly. The village seems to be a suffocated silence, filled with the occasional distant howl through the dense trees. In this modest home where they lived, Jehoahaz and Jehoiachin digested their father's journal line by line for the cryptic notes. This rest of the group sat silently in the semi-dark room due to the wavering candle flicker, playing shadows on restless faces. Baruch was trying to tell us something, Jehoahaz muttered, running his fingers across the faded ink. But what did he mean by, the gate is not what you think? Jehoiachin, always the more intuitive of the two, leaned back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. It's a warning. The gate isn't just a passage, it's something else, something alive. Aviva shivered at the words from his lips. Alive? Do you even hear yourself? We should not have touched it. We should not have even opened that gate. "Perhaps," Jehoiachin said, his voice whispery but unflinching. "But we've traveled too far to turn back now." It had by dawn finally been resolved. They would go through the gate. It was really only a way to find Baruch and the mysteries of the ancient relic. Ever practical, Yedid began collecting all that was necessary: ropes, lanterns, and provisions. Aviva stuffed herbs and poultices, whispering a prayer for each one. Riva gathered her tools, reluctant, with quivering fingers giving away her trepidation. Adina said nothing at all, not a word of teasing. She had never been this pale and expressionless in her life. The forest felt heavier this time as they approached the gate, as though the air itself were thick with unseen eyes that watched their every move. The gate stood exactly the way it did the day before, its iron surface glinting faintly in the morning light. Jehoahaz stepped forward, clutching his father's journal tightly. "Are we ready?" No one answered, but their collective silence was enough. The ritual to reopen the gate was quicker this time. The group worked in tense silence, each movement deliberate. When the final drop of blood touched the gate, it groaned open once more, revealing the swirling void within. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Turn back. You are not welcome." Jehoiachin ignored them, moving toward the gate. He looked back at the others, his eyes blazing with determination. If anyone wants to stay behind, now is the time. No one moved. One by one, they stepped into the darkness. The sensation was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The air seemed to press against their skin, cold and heavy, as if the void itself were trying to push them back. The world around them dissolved into a swirling mass of shadows and faint, flickering lights. Then suddenly they were through. They came out into a landscape that defied understanding. The earth was charred and cracked beneath their feet, as if it had been burned by some long-dead fire. Gray clouds churned overhead, a heavy, sickly color, and seemed to twist and convulse. And in the distance, jagged mountains rose up like the teeth of some enormous beast. But the most disquieting aspect of this place was the silence. It was total, pushing down on them like a weight. What is this place?" Adina whispered, her voice quivering. Jehoiachin knelt and began to inspect the ground. "It is not another world. It is a prison. Something was sealed away here ages ago." Aviva clutched her amulet tightly. "And we just walked into it." As they ventured further into the desolate landscape, strange markings began to appear on the ground, symbols similar to those on the gate. They glowed faintly, casting an eerie light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the whispers that now surrounded them. Jehoahaz paused, studying the symbols. "These are part of the seal. They're warnings. And if I'm reading this correctly..." He trailed off, his face pale. "What?" Yedid asked, moving closer. Jehoahaz raised his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "The seal is breaking." A chilling howl of bone and frozen air split through the oppressive silence like a blade. They froze, staring about at the desolate wasteland. "What was that?" Riva demanded, her voice shaking. "Somebody's here," Jehoiachin declared, his grip on the dagger hilt growing tighter. The howl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy, shuffling footsteps. From the mist ahead, a figure began to emerge, a towering humanoid shape with glowing red eyes. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as though it were sizing up its prey. "Run!" Jehoahaz shouted, pulling Jehoiachin with him. The group scattered, running through the twisted terrain in a desperate bid to escape. The creature gave chase, its movements unnaturally fast despite its massive size. Adina stumbled, letting out a cry as her foot caught on a jagged rock. Yedid turned back, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet just as the creature's clawed hand swiped through the air where she had fallen. "This way," Jehoiachin called, pointing them toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. They squeezed through the crevice, coming out into a secret cavern. There, at its center, was a vast stone structure, a temple old and crumbling yet still full of power. Its markings were identical to those on the gate. "This must be where the seal was created," Jehoahaz breathed, his voice full of awe. The whispers grew louder as they approached the temple, forming words that sent chills down their spines. "You are too late. It awakens." Jehoiachin ignored the voices, pushing open the temple doors. Inside, they found a massive altar, surrounded by flickering torches that seemed to light themselves as they entered. At the center of the altar lay a book, its pages glowing faintly. Jehoiachin stretched out his hand to touch it, but just as his fingers felt the smooth cover, the ground began to shudder beneath them. The temple erupted into a deafening roar as the cracks split open along the walls. From the dark recesses of the temple, other creatures appeared, twisted, monstrous beings with eyes that glowed and jagged claws. "We need to go! Now!" Aviva shouted in her panic. Jehoahaz took the book and ran out of the temple, the group behind him. The landscape outside was barren and in shambles. Ground split apart. Fiery chasms erupted where solid earth had been only a moment before. "What have you done?" Riva screamed, her eyes wide with terror. Jehoiachin didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a great shadowy shape was rising out of the earth, a creature of pure darkness, its body like smoke and ash as it coiled and writhed. "The seal," Jehoahaz said, his voice shaking. "It's breaking more quickly than we thought." As the group scrunched up their bodies to gain safety, Jehoiachin turned the pages, scanning the text with his eyes, ancient and racked. "There's a way to stop it," he uttered, his voice full of urgency. "But it calls for sacrifice." "What sort of sacrifice?" Adina asked dully. Jehoiachin's expression read grim. "A life." The group fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Before anyone could respond, the shadowy figure let out another roar, its form growing larger as it consumed the landscape. Jehoahaz stepped forward, his jaw set. "We'll do whatever it takes. For Father, for the village that monstrous shadow cast over this desolate world, with its incommunicable magnitude and shape, not possible for the human mind to understand it." Its roar throbbed across the desert, causing vibrations in the ground. A battered, desperate group huddled together near the crumbling remains of the ancient temple. He gripped the book tightly as its faint glow lit up only the hope they might find here. The soft whispers that followed them since the entrance of the gate screamed through their minds, warnings and curses. "We haven't much time," he said with a trembling voice. "The seal is almost fully broken." Jehoiachin stepped forward, his face pale but resolved. "What does the book say? How do we stop this thing?" Jehoahaz rummaged through the brittle pages, his hands shaking. "The seal can be restored, but it requires power, immense power, and a life." The group sat in silence, the weight of his words hovering in the air like a dark presence. Adina finally broke the silence, her voice cracking. "A life? What does that even mean? Whose life?" "The one who enables the ritual," Jehoahaz said, averted his head and would not lift it to catch her eye. "The book says the seal must be reforged with a living soul. That is how it can only trap the darkness once more." Aviva gripped the pendant at her throat, moved her lips, speaking silent words. "It's madness. Of course there must be a different way through." "There isn't," Jehoiachin said, his voice firm. "We've seen what this thing can do. If we don't stop it, it won't just destroy this place. It'll break through to our world." Riva stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "So who's going to do it? Who's going to make that sacrifice?" No one answered. The shadow creature roared again, its form writhing and spreading as it devoured the crumbling landscape. The group realized they didn't have much time left. Jehoahaz ran his fingers over the symbols in the book. It has to be done at the center of this place. It's where the seal was made originally. There's a marking on this map. He pointed to a diagram etched into the page, a towering spire in the distance, surrounded by jagged cliffs and rivers of molten rock. Of course it's there, Yedid muttered. Why wouldn't it be in the most dangerous place imaginable? Jehoiachin shouldered his pack. Then we'd better get moving. The path to the spire was grueling. The earth beneath their feet cracked and opened, sending them leaping from one widening chasm to another. The air became thicker with every step, choking their lungs. At one point, a swarm of smaller shadow creatures descended upon them, their glowing eyes and jagged limbs cutting through the darkness. Jehoiachin fought them off with his dagger, while Riva used the tools in her satchel to set makeshift traps. "We can't keep this up," Adina gasped, clutching a wound on her arm. "We're not going to make it." "We have to," Jehoahaz said, determination welling in his voice. "If we don't, everything ends here." When they finally reached the spire, the group was battered and exhausted. The huge structure towered above them, covered with the same glowing symbols as the gate and the book. Energy seemed to reverberate all around it, causing their skin to tingle. "This is it," Jehoahaz said, stepping forward. The heart of the seal. The earth shook as the shadow creature materialized in the distance, its form now towering over the spire. The whispers grew louder, almost drowning out their thoughts. Jehoiachin turned to the group. "We don't have much time. Jehoahaz, start the ritual." Jehoahaz hesitated. "But someone has to stay behind to complete it. Once it starts, there's no turning back." Jehoiachin placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "I know." Jehoiachin's words hung in the air like a death sentence. The others stared at him in shock. "No," Adina said, shaking her head. "You can't. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Jehoiachin said, his voice steady. "I've known since the moment we entered this place. It was always going to come to this." Riva stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "But why you? Why not one of us?" "Because it is my decision," Jehoiachin said, "and because I believe in all of you. You will finish what we have started. You will save our world." Jehoahaz's hands were shaking as he opened the book and began chanting the incantation. The symbols on the spire shone brighter, cutting through the darkness like rays of a bright light. As the ritual began, the shadow creature let out an earth-shaking roar and charged toward the spire. The others formed a defensive line, using everything they had to hold it back. Aviva hurled vials of her herbs, creating bursts of light that slowed the creature's advance. Yedid and Riva tended to set traps in cooperation, their actions wild but precise. Adina fought with a ferocity none of them had seen before. Her blades sliced through smaller shadow creatures that swirled around them. Jehoiachin stood at the base of the spire, his face illuminated by the glowing symbols. He looked up at his brother, a small smile on his lips. "Take care of them, Jehoahaz." Before Jehoahaz could respond, Jehoiachin stepped into the circle of light at the center of the spire. The spire exploded in blinding light as the ritual reached its climax. The shadow creature let out one final, agonized roar before being pulled into the light, its massive form dissolving into nothingness. The ground beneath them stabilized, and the oppressive darkness began to lift. The whispers fell silent. When the light faded, Jehoiachin was gone. The group stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the spot where he had stood. Jehoahaz clutched the book to his chest, his vision blurred by tears. He did it. He saved us. The gate swung open again. Its whirling void was calm and quiet. The company stepped through, out into their village again. Fresh air filled the lungs. The oppressive presence of the otherworldly presence was gone. Still, the weight of the loss of Jehoiachin pained them. Days later, they met at the edge of the forest, near a small monument erected in his memory. There, Jehoahaz placed the book on the altar, its symbols now dark and lifeless. "He gave everything to save us," Jehoahaz said, his voice cracking. "We can't let his sacrifice be in vain." The others nodded, their faces set with determination. Years went by, and the tale of the gate evolved into a myth, caution to those who could dare try and touch forces they hardly understood. Still, down deep in the woods, in what was left of the spire, the symbol's weak luminescence came creeping back. Along with it came the whispers. "The gate is closed, but for how long?